everybody. Ozzy here. I actually work for a company called Powder Creek Consulting, and a division of Powder Creek is product-oriented division of IntelliGRC, which is a incubated startup within an existing company. Powder Creek has been around since the 90s. We do a lot of DoD and federal contract work around software engineering, business process automation, things like that. And then my team specifically has a background in information assurance, SRMAT, ATO processes, things like that, FedRAMP, et cetera. And then more recently, in the last 40 years, we've been developing this GRC product, taking some of the pain points that we learned and using some of the federal GRC tools like EMAS, ZACTA, CSAM, et cetera, and trying to figure out how we can do more automation. So our thought process was 4 years ago, we start off by developing this GRC platform that would be targeting CMMC, small, medium-sized organizations. And we've been, in the last 4 years, providing services in parallel with the tool as part of our beta testing of the tool, which has been over 200 small business companies in the DID organization space. I'm not going to talk about the product today. Instead, I'm going to be talking about some of the problems that we've seen from assessing smaller organizations in CMMC and 800-171. And then I'm also going to be talking about kind of the different problem areas and what kind of solutions we can look for to solve some of these challenges. These are some of the challenges that we're also focused on in IntelliGRC. So to start, the topic is relatively expensive and complex. That's a pretty common trend. Everybody will tell you, compliance isn't a one-time thing. It's very costly and complicated. There's a lot of subjectivity and a lot of standards and frameworks. And as an industry, what we're trying to do is normalize it. And one of the examples I kind of came up with this term called commodities, right? Currently, it's not seen as a commodity, it's seen as a luxury or almost this unattainable thing of having security compliance in place, not considered as normal as, hey, I'm going to start a company, therefore I need HR, marketing, IT. Cybersecurity is not one of those groups that they're usually considered. So one of the examples that I'm getting in terms of commodity and abundance is the Tesla model. So Tesla originally started off as an electrical vehicle company. And then they kind of pivoted, and at some point in time, they said, you know what, we're an energy company, right? And the strategy there was the highest cost factor in electrical vehicles was the battery and the battery technology. So what they instead did is to start developing a gigafactory, which was to mass produce battery and battery technologies. And the intent behind it was we can have a surge of batteries and battery technologies in the market. Price will go down on electrical cars, therefore be more attainable and acceptable, and so on and so forth. And then that also brought the rise of competition, naturally. And so in our field, we have some of the similar challenges in information security compliance, right? Again, very difficult to scale for SMBs, expensive, there's a lot of unorganized information out there. There is complexity, and to solve these, we need the same solution, an abundance of resources, whether that be skills, information, or other methods to commoditize security compliance. So one of the examples that I came across was the expensive skill set, right? Everybody knows this. In InfoSec, we have a high demand, low supply of skilled staff. And this is a common issue, even in the IT sector. Software developers are hard to come by, et cetera. The problem I see is the job qualifications, the prerequisites that recruiters have out there are ridiculous. They don't make any sense. They do not promote entry into the field. And so, an example I saw is, similar to the housing market, where, right now people are saying, hey, the prices are too high, I'm not going to buy, but you're going to miss that opportunity. So to hear somebody say, hey, as an information security professional, $220,000 salary is not out of the norm. It's now becoming the norm. And that's the problem, right? Again, low supply, high demand. So how do we solve that problem, right? We need to minimize the entry-level threshold for people to get into this field. And I don't think the DoD is doing any help as well. Right now, you look at any DoD contracts, they're incentivizing you to look at credentials, right? They're incentivizing you to charge a certain labor category if you have a degree and certain experience and certifications, but they're not promoting entry level. And then another example that I saw was a developer had posted on Twitter. He's the developer of the Fast API solution. It's a software component, and so he applied to a job. And the irony was he did not get the job because he didn't have the qualifications The solution and the technology was created 1.5 years ago, and the job requirements said 4+ years of experience. And at the same time, the gentleman was an inventor of the technology. So if that's happening today, then we have a big problem on our hands. The other challenge we have is other than expensive skill sets, expensive solutions. So a lot of the challenges we're seeing in the small div space is around seeing solutions. You know, it's a can of worms in itself, right? And then looking at vulnerability management solutions, there's a very limited subset of tools out there that can solve these problems. And then the DFARS requirements of FedRAMP. So the problem is on the FedRAMP side, you know, the FedRAMP PMO is not making an aggressive push towards sponsoring CSPs, cloud service providers. So we have a limited set of solutions available on the market. And small business looking at DFARS requirements, especially DFARS clause statement C through G that talk about incident response requirements, they have this challenge of trying to find a cloud service solution that is one FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. In addition to that, meets the clause statements C and G. This is the whole pitch to GCC high, right? And I feel like the problem with it is it's causing it to monopolize, right? Instead of creating more diversity of solutions and options out there. So when a small business says, hey, can I be CMMC compliant with GCC high or without GCC high? And the answer is yes, you can be compliant with CMMC level 3 without GCC high, but will you be compliant with DFARS? Maybe not, and that's where the problem comes in. So I think as an industry, again, the abundance is the solution, right? And the more competition that comes onto the market, the more viable options, the more diversity of solutions we have on the market, the more accessible it will be. I think naturally this will happen as trends go up in terms of cyber spend. But you know, right now I think we just need to make more efforts towards adoption, more efforts towards telling the FedRAMP PMO, you need to let more solutions in through the door and expand that capability. So that way small business has more options to go off. And then complex. So complexity, this is another common challenge that I see in small business space. Looking at high-level qualitative requirements, it's very subjective. So the problem is a mature information security standard or framework is going to be generic and very subjective. They say that because their intentions are good. The intentions are flexibility on what it is you do to solve those problems. But the problem is if you're too generic, then small businesses sitting there scratching their heads saying, I don't know what this means. The other opposite side of that end is if you're too specific, something like HIPAA, for example, that has standards listed in the law that says explicitly you have to do this, this, and this. Then it causes concern from industry saying, hey, it's too expensive. You're telling me exactly what I have to do. You're not giving me flexibility here. So it's a double-edged sword in that approach. But the problem is when you have subjective requirements and you're not providing enough supplemental guidance information for small businesses to understand what those subjective requirements are, you have an industry full of opinions. Everyone's got their own opinion on that's the right way or that's the wrong way to do that. And the common answer you're getting from a consultant is that depends. And that doesn't help. And when you have too many options, you cause analysis paralysis, where there's 50 ways to skin that cat. Which way is the best way? The small business doesn't have strategic know-how or the intention to even focus on that. They're more focused on keeping their business afloat. The other thing that I'm also seeing in the industry, not just for the defense industrial base with CMMC, but also other standards in the information security world. Unorganized information. There is a lot of information, a lot of resources online, but it's very unorganized. It's hard to tell where you need to go and look at specific things to get understanding of what it is the requirements are asking for. So there's a lot of laws, regulations, executive orders, frameworks, etc. And to know the background of CMMC, I believe there's approximately 30 different sources you can look at just to understand the timeline and the story. Actually, I put in a reference here to a colleague of mine, Jacob Horn at Summit 7. He has a great video on YouTube that explains the fascinating history of CMMC. And he does a really good job at actually dissecting how it all started, talking about the original story to where we are today and the next steps. And another piece I wanted to also mention with the unorganized information is within the federal government itself, anytime there's an administration change, there is leadership change. When there's leadership change, there's opinion change, right? A new CIO or a new CTO says, well, the way you're doing it last year is no longer valid. You got to renew your ATO, so you need to do it this way. We're going to change everything on you. And it's like you're constantly chasing this moving target. And it's causing a lot of grief and a lot of wasted taxpayer dollars, especially in the fact that if the federal government has similar systems that it's purchasing or similar technology that it's acquiring, the acquisition process always gets held up on this, hey, we're going to spend a year, 2 years on getting an ATO. And if you're lucky, 6 months, right? A lot of these federal agencies, they won't provide detailed guidance. And I believe it's likely because they're also understaffed, right? You've got an ISM and the federal government is managing 10 systems. They're not going to do a great job. So how are they to be expected to give you direction in terms of how to be successful? And that's part of the challenge. So I think the CMMC assessments will follow the same problem. They will likely end up in the same boat where you have assessors that are going to apply their own interpretation of things. So you're at the mercy of their opinion. And if they don't understand the technology or the capabilities you have, they're not going to be able to assess you effectively, right? There's a lot of subjectivity, and hopefully the CMMC rollout will address the subjectivity aspect, which I don't think it has yet. And I think, again, it goes back to the culture in the federal government where information is either proprietary or overclassified. There's not a lot of information sharing going on. If you're acquiring technology and say you purchase a SaaS solution as a federal government agency, and it looks very similar to purchase a second SaaS solution, if they're owning the solution and they're paying taxpayer dollars on that, they have the authority to say, hey, we're going to take this and share this information with this next vendor so that we can save time and money to get you quickly through the ATO process. I think the same problem is going to happen in the div space. There's not a lot of examples out there. And again, documentation is also a big concern. As Nathan was mentioning earlier, we're seeing small businesses don't have any documents. They have no policy, they have no procedures, and CMMC level 3 is very heavy on the process maturity requirements of documentation. Changing opinions, we already talked about. Manual and subjective efforts, this is the other thing. I'm seeing a lot of small businesses not adopting the culture change that CMMC is asking for. They're looking at this thing as a one-time checklist, one and done, and they're walking away. And similar problems with the ATOs in the federal government space. I think intentionally, the authoritative body that is responsible for issuing an ATO or certification chooses to turn their head the other way during the 3-year cycle in which you're not up for renewal, right? I think it's going to be the same problem in the CMMC space. And so things are going to fall by the wayside during this 3-year period. And then what's going to happen is last minute, hey, you're up for your certification renewal. We're going to crash and get this thing done and make sure we're good to go for the next audit. So that I think is going to be the same problem we're going to see in the CMMC space. And we already talked about minimal FedRAMP authorized solutions. There is a concept in the cloud security model talking about shared or customer responsibility matrices. I don't think industry or government is doing a good job at pushing these vendors to do a better job at this. Even if you look at something like Microsoft's shared responsibility model for Office 365, and you have CMMC requirements, they do tell you, these are things you need to be responsible for, these are things we're responsible for. However, even those things that they're stating you're responsible for, there's no guidance, there's still that subjectivity there, right? So small business says, hey, I need to address this control, but I have no idea how to do this. And the other thing I'm noticing is there's not a lot of interoperability between solutions. So how do you tie your SIEM solution with your cloud services that you're leveraging? There's not a lot of interoperability happening. Again, I think the problem goes back to this is proprietary, this is mine, right? I'm not going to share this with you. And then the lack of automation is another big piece that I'm seeing. Small businesses are also struggling with this piece in that maintaining compliance is going to require more than one full-time job, depending on the size of your company, right? A lot of small businesses, they wear multiple hats. There's usually one guy doing everything, right? Or they've outsourced it. Even then, outsourcing it hasn't been very successful from what I've seen because that vendor is not going to have what's best for you. They're not going to have your interests in what's best for your business. They're more focused on specifically these services we're charging for, right? And then with the opinions that we're seeing in the CMMC space, I'm hearing a lot of the large companies talking about their opinions. I'm not seeing a lot of small being represented well. And so there's not a lot of examples of what success looks like. Even now with CMMC, everything is still in turmoil. There's a lot of chaos going on, a lot of changes. But at the end of the day, I think what we need to do a better job as industries have a centralized, authoritative source of information. I think the government needs to do a better job at giving examples that small businesses can go off of. So going back to entry into the field, one of the things that we try to do is take the approach of hiring junior and grooming and training from within, giving a clearly defined growth path, a career path for entry-level individuals. One of the things that we also have done is we've partnered with another Virginia-based grant program. We were actually connected to that grant through GENEDGE. It's called Go Virginia. It's a STEM investment from state. And they had selected Blue Ridge Community College in the Shenandoah Valley region. And what they offered was a boot camp for people who applied for security plus certification and training. We were able to help create the curriculum as well, and influence what are the things that they should be learning and what are the big needs of the Virginia Commonwealth, focused around DCARS compliance and things like that. And with that, we also offered internships that were paid, and then also converted some of those interns into full-time employees. And the nice thing about it was the city of Waynesboro offered us an office and said, here, you guys can use this as an office if you guys are going to continue to do this. And so we've kind of built that relationship out and trying to bring people in from that Blue Ridge Community College program. And I think other organizations out there need to do a better job at doing something similar, or creating relationships with maybe community colleges or other programs such as the Bytes Foundation has their programs to try to provide more entry-level opportunities for those that want to get into the field. The other thing that I think is going to help with the subjectivity in the defense industrial base, but also something that the federal government should probably do a better job at for the systems that they have, is reference architecture. I think this is a huge, huge help in the industry. If we had, organized, open source, authoritative information sharing, reference architectures, right? If we can, even within our experience in the last 4 years, assessing over 200 small businesses in the state of Virginia and other states as well, but majority of those were in the state of Virginia, we saw that you can probably boil them down to 10 similar looking environments, right? They're either a small company with cloud services, they have an on-premise facility, or they have a manufacturing plant, right? You can boil them down to 10 examples. We can take those 10 examples, vet them through the CMMC requirements, and create reference architectures, create reference examples, system security plans, control implementation statements that can be used as templates that other SMBs can look at and say, that's what success looks like. It's been vetted. If I copy what they're doing, I have a higher degree of assurance in being successful as well. I think the industry needs to do this. I see it in the federal ATO process. Every time a system needs to go through an ATO for their acquisition to the federal government, it's always a reinvent the wheel every single time. It depends on who the ISSM is, who the CISO is, their opinions of things, right? And the assessors that are assessing. I don't understand why we can't get on the same page with that. We've been doing it for a very long time now. If we have these examples that you can follow templates and approaches, you should be able to have a higher degree of success. And again, minimizing that subjectivity through these types of templates, reference architectures is going to also do a benefit for the assessors. It removes a lot of the opinions on what they're assessing as well, because they too know what success might look like, or they may have a better clue. And so from both sides, the organization seeking the certification for CMMC and the assessors can both use those artifacts or those reference architectures as an example of what is success. So the other thing is, I think as the federal government, they also have the responsibility to tell vendors out there what's the right way to generate a shared responsibility model or a shared responsibility matrix. Again, every vendor has their own flavor of how they're doing it, and the content sometimes is very subjective still. If you're responsible for X, Y, Z, and I'm responsible for everything else. I think if the government were to influence cloud service providers or vendors even, I'm not talking about just CSPs, even managed service providers, IT service providers, to say, hey, here's a standardized template on a shared responsibility model. This is where you can delineate who's responsible for the customer side versus the services that you're providing or hosting for that customer. I think the government should push for that. And I think the industry can also make an effort to push for that and try to make that a little bit more concise. The other things that would help with interoperability is there's a lot of solutions out there. Actually, Nicholas Chilene, who is the chief software officer at the Air Force, who just recently retired or left the DoD, if you saw in the news, he had this grand vision. And the grand vision was this continuous authority to operate, this ATO in a day concept. And he said, why is it that we can't do that, right? What's holding us back? And I think it comes down to the standardized approach to sharing information between systems that is machine readable, human readable. There have been efforts made towards it in the past, things like SCAP, Security Content Automation Protocol. If you're familiar with DoD STIGs, they use that as well. And then more recently, because of that presentation that Nicholas did, NIST started a project, an open source project called OSCAL, the Open Security Controls Assessment Language. The intent was to codify control implementation statements, any content that would go into your system security plan. So I think as even the small businesses adopt CMMC, leveraging some of these codified capabilities is a need and will help. So again, at the end of the day, the example of commodity, right? The three buckets that we talked about that are making it very inaccessible to be compliant is having more people join the field, so promoting that entry, supporting organized and open source and authoritative information sharing, things like reference architectures, SSP templates, OEM templates, things along those nature, and then standardized information interoperability solutions like OSCAL and SCAP as well. And these are some of the problems that we've seen, and through IntelliGRC are trying to leverage some of these capabilities to make it more manageable, at least in terms of compliance for small businesses. So that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions?
So you talked a lot about the standardization of documentation and sharing or protection, things like that. One of the things in the GRC space that has historically been a problem is the find and replace type of program planning. I was curious based upon what you said, what is your opinion on how do you balance that standardization with find and replace problem?
Sure. So you're referring to tailoring almost, right? Tailoring controls and tailoring how you're meeting an objective. So I think standardization, again, is double-edged sword, right? You're either going too far to being too specific or you're being fusionary. So what I think is going to help with the reference architecture-based approach and some of these standardized information, like OSCAL and things like that and SCAP, is to give a library of robust content or a library of how many ways you can spin that cat, for example. And I think leveraging technology, again, is something that we're trying to do with IntelliGRC as well, is using things like machine learning, right, natural language processing, to better understand what a company is doing to address a requirement. And then taking all the information, whether it's solution one to implement MFA or what have you, and recommending tailored recommendations and tailored solutions to help them solve the problems in the most cost-effective manner, right? In a small business is not thinking like enterprise, they're not thinking risk management, right? They don't even use GRC, right? GRC is traditionally an enterprise solution. And even then, all they've done is taken complicated spreadsheets, moved into a web application. That still requires a full-time job to babysit it. So what we're trying to do is make that more accessible to the SMBs, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that really answered your questions, but I think it's a very difficult question to answer as well.
I have more of an issue to share, not really a question. So I'm a GRC practitioner. I was fortunate to have had a chance to take 8 products to the Federal Authorization Process, like audit and MI. And I'm a former government ISSM as well. So I know what you're talking about. I'm currently working through a project where I have a business a government agency sponsor for FedRAMP, and a DoD entity that wants to back up for all in 2022. So I'm taking the same, I'm using the same assessor, pretty much leveraging the same work, but I'm wasting time from 3 different government agencies to review these packages where they can all just look at the impact of the full package since it has all control plus, FedRAMP plus. So this is something that I've seen throughout my career, just wasted efforts. When all can just leverage one package, but they each want, this federal agency just wants better. They don't really care for impact of the four, and they don't care for that DoD agency's own review. DoD agency says exactly the same thing. I want impact of the four. I don't really care what you're doing. Then you have state ramp right now. They just kind of want it to be relevant as well. So they wanted their own package, their own templates, their own, since they just released them. So a waste of effort and time and money.
I agree. And I think that's part of the problem is that FedRAMP was intended to solve those challenges, but it did not. I think FedRAMP has its own set of challenges, biggest one being adoption, right? They're not doing a good job at training contracting officers to say, hey, we need to be more accepting of CSPs and sponsoring them. Because anytime you even go to a federal agency, you say, hey, I have this SaaS solution, I want to get FedRAMP. Oh, we're not sponsoring you. We don't want that liability, right? And so that's the problem. So what's the point if no one's adopting it at the end of the day? I think the FedRAMP PMO needs to train contracting and acquisition officers in sponsoring, being more sponsoring able, I guess. And the other thing is also, being more codified in terms of, regardless of agency, why couldn't a FedRAMP solution just be automatically inherited by state ramp, right? Or even DoD impact levels, right? This is, again, I think it goes back to information sharing within the government, right? The sheer fact that if I work a GSA contract today as a contractor, and I went to work a DHS or DoD contract, I'm getting cleared 3 times. I already have the DoD clearance. I already have a top secret or what have you, DHS or any other agency that I don't care. You're going to start all over again from scratch. And every time they're sponsoring that investigation, there's money being spent, taxpayer money, because they don't trust each other. There's bureaucracy, the politics, the egos, what have you. I think we need to do a better job of, again, information sharing, right? The government is the only people who have the ability to put their foot down to make that happen, not industry. Industry can help push in that direction, but until they change their attitude, it's the same thing. Any other questions? I think my time is up now. Nope.